Hello and welcome to the virtual investor conferences. My name is Athena Katsoulis and on behalf of Social Suite ESG, as well as the OTC markets, we're very pleased to have you join us for our next live presentation from Chilean Cobalt Corp, a cobalt and copper exploration and development company focused on projects in Chile. Please note you can submit your questions in the box to the left of the slides. You can also view a company's availability for one-on-one meetings through the scheduled meetings tab found on the conference platform. At this point, I'm very pleased to welcome Duncan Blunt, CEO and Director of Chilean Cobalt Corp, which trades on the OTC markets under symbol COBA. Welcome, Duncan.
Dana. So today I'll be talking about Chilean Cobalt Corp, C3 for short. We've just listed literally last week on the US OTC. We did a direct placement and still are submitting for DTC eligibility. So we are listed, but we're not trading yet. So still kind of in a market purgatory, but we're well on our way. There's your standard disclaimer. It will be available on our website soon once we post this presentation. So in terms of our go forward plan, I'll touch on that before going into the company itself. As I mentioned, we did get a direct placement on the US OTC exchange last week, OTC Pink. We're concurrent with that. We're uplisting to the OTC QB. And filing for the DTC eligibility and all the other requirements to get trading. After we're listed, fourth quarter, we'll look to raise $5 to $10 million in a placement or some sort of a transaction with a strategic. The idea of what we're building is a full cycle sustainability strategy for the La Cobaltera cobalt copper project. It's a brownfield district in northern Chile, near the coast, about 10 kilometers from the coast, and at lower altitude, so about 800-meter average altitude. Makes it very approachable, and the brownfield nature of not only the district, but specifically the La Cobaltera project gives us an advantage in terms of understanding the mineralization and being able to restart, plus have exploration upside. Next steps on development is to follow or design a follow-up exploration program that will focus on the greenfield areas of our holdings. We've done a drilling program a few years ago. I'll detail that in a little bit. Drilled about 22,000 meters of core with our technical partner SRK. The follow-on will be focusing on the greenfield areas. First, advanced mapping, and then trenching, eventually drilling for target prioritization. What we have is is oxide, mostly past producing oxide areas, shallower, 30, 40 meters deep, and then deeper sulfide potential that we have tested with some success in that drilling campaign. So right now we're also looking at partnerships and technology offerings. Everything from exploration. There's a lot of drone-based technologies that aren't necessarily cutting edge anymore, but it's cutting costs certainly and making it more accessible to do large swath exploration campaigns in more of a tactical manner than using a fixed wing or helicopter. So looking at that, also looking at bioleaching. We've done some testing on an old tailings pile with some initial success. We'll be looking into more of that. And then when it comes to mining and metallurgical technologies, there's a lot that works. We know that it works from a base level. That's good to know. But also looking at some of the advancements that have been made and are being made right now. Pursuing strategic relationships with technical partners and potential off-takers. Obviously producing cobalt and copper. Cobalt is on, I believe, every critical minerals list. Copper is on a few of them. Not yet on the U.S. It may be soon, but not yet. But Chile is a free trade agreement with the United States that's been in play for a bit. So that means that particularly cobalt material sourced from Chile and or processed in Chile is eligible for Inflation Reduction Act incentives that have been outlined with the recent U.S. legislation. So pursuing those relationships, also looking at downstream integration in Chile determining how far downstream we want to go, what product do we want to produce and sell, evaluating that right now, as well as some near-term production opportunities where we could see production potentially in the next 3 years or so, kind of at a startup phase one type level. And then looking at other strategic and accretive opportunities, primarily consolidating the district in which we already operate before we would entertain anything else. And that's our focus right now. The company itself, we're a US-based critical minerals exploration and development company. Our primary and thus far sole asset is about 2,600 hectares of exploration land, exploitation concessions actually, that we hold in Chile. We own the mineral rights 100%, no encumbrances, no minority partners, and it's not a lease from the government that we have to renew. It's actual ownership with a licensing process, but ownership is the situation that we have. We're focused on sustainability, everything from exploration into development and mining, all the way through end of life mine planning. So, factoring that in right now, a project that we have, thankfully in Chile, it's conducive to a lot of ESG standards, environmental, social, and good governance. Fairly rigorous environmental regime for getting licenses and permits. We're looking at opportunities to go above and beyond, particularly sourcing water and energy. We're 10 kilometers from the coast, so that does give us a big advantage. And then there's obviously solar potential and other potential in Chile. And in terms of a lot of the doing business surveys and corruption surveys, Chile ranks quite favorably. So the governance aspect of ESG is also quite strong in Chile. What we have at La Cobaltera is a district scale opportunity across our holdings and even more broadly. But specifically, there's a brownfield channel of past production that did not stop because it was mined out. It stopped when World War II ended. I'll touch on that in a little bit. But cobalt prices ran up, demand ran up, and then it came off at the end of the conflict. So there's a lot of opportunities still there in terms of reopening potential deposits, as well as certainly exploration. Since World War II ended, it's been the better part of a century, and suffice it to say, mining exploration technology has improved quite significantly, as have commodity prices, making this all quite economic today. So, as I mentioned, cobalt production happened off and on for well beyond that period prior to, starting about 200 years ago, off and on up until the 1940s. So what we have is copper, cobalt oxide, and sulfide resources with evidence of gold at depth across dozens of exploration targets. In terms of our mission, we're an innovator and leader that strives to be the most responsible supplier of critical mineral resources for the development of advanced materials and cleaner energy technologies that address the most pressing environmental and development issues. Effectively, we see ourselves and the products that we intend to produce as being solutions to a lot of issues, particularly enabling new technologies, whether it's materials technologies with alloys and magnets, which cobalt is still important in, as well as chemical energy related technologies, primarily the cathode side of a lithium-ion battery. I touched on some of the ESG. We have a pretty real ESG team that's leading this charge. And though we are in exploration, we're already looking at some of the metrics and frameworks that are already being developed. It seems that IRMA is leading the charge, has been well within our focus for the past 2 years or so, and we expect to adopt frameworks into exploration and drilling. At this phase, there's obviously not that much in terms of activity and environmental involvement, social involvement. Obviously good governance is utmost priority, but establishing a framework, tracking things, knowing what's upcoming in terms of our development plan and what needs to be addressed ahead of time is where we're focused right now. The district itself, you can see our holdings here in red. Those are held by Baltum, our 100% wholly owned local subsidiary, and some of the consolidation opportunities are kind of to the east and to the south as well. You can even see on this map how close the coast is, just right there. Um, the uh, the whole district, the past producing channel is kind of right here, right through the middle of the chart. From the bottom left to the upper right, where the blocks are a little more jagged. Cobalt grades range from 1% to over 15%. We don't expect to mine that going forwards. 1%, 2% potentially, but more like 0.5 type grades, along with pretty attractive copper grades. Most of the past production was obviously focused on the oxide outcroppings that are plainly visible. The purplish, pinkish red cobalt oxide and the bluish green copper oxide certainly make for pretty easy and attractive targets for a lot of the small scale miners over the past few hundred years. Um, more recently, there had been some production again into World War II. A flotation plant was built, has obviously been abandoned, but there was underground development as well, in addition to some of the open pits. The history itself, I won't detail all of this, but you can see, starting in the 1800s up until very recently, there's been a pretty steady level of either activity, mining activity, exploration activity, or research on the area. Being a unique primary cobalt district, the Chilean government had done a lot of work. You can see here, Corfo and Inami had done some work in the area. Prior to that, U.S. Geological Survey had also done some work in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and kind of throughout the before, during, and after all of that, there were private, primarily local companies that were involved in some small scale production of copper and or cobalt. You see here, Chile is a country with very good records, tax records, production records in many cases. And this researcher aggregated some of that information to show historical production, rough figure about 7,000 tons, and grades, as I mentioned, 1% to over 15% or so, historically. The company Chilean Cobalt, we came in around 2016, started consolidating district. We also did the exploration campaign that I discussed. One of the big benefits is we don't have any local communities on site. There were past, as you can see here, some small scale miners that were mining some of the copper oxide. Inami has a processing plant about 70 kilometers away that accepts tolling ore. They were processing, 1%, 2%, 3% copper. But when we came in and took over ownership, moved them out without issue, and they've gone on to other projects. The geology itself, what we have, the deposits are primarily cobaltite. We've got a 20-kilometer copper trend system that overlaps a 12-kilometer cobalt-rich vein system. The copper tends to be 0.5 to 1%, particularly in the oxide area. There's some areas of 2-3%. At depth in the sulfides, we've had copper grades of high single digits with associated cobalt. The cobalt vein system is about 0.2 to 1% cobalt overall, with some associated copper. So, vein system 1 to 10 meters wide, average about 2.5 meters, which is certainly plenty if you're looking at it kind of as mining the copper. And by the way, the cobalt credits are so high that they make up the majority of the economics. It's a pretty attractive project when you look at it. And again, the surface mineralization that you can see goes down to 40, 50 meters before getting into a transition zone, and the oxides are at least 300 meters deep, at least as deep as we drilled previously. The work that we did, that whole body of prior information that existed, we aggregated a lot of that ourselves. Some of the families that own some of the land also provided that. And we have a lot of that, old maps and records, which are quite useful when you have a project that's lasted multi-generations. If you have a generation or two where metals prices aren't attractive and maybe the holding family doesn't have an interest in mining, a lot of times they can be forgotten. So those physical maps have been quite helpful in us modernizing the exploration. And as I discussed in the beginning, we did most of this work with SRK as our independent technical directors. Still involved with them to this day, the same partners, in fact. And back in 2019, we did district-wide exploration, drilled, as I mentioned, about 22,000 meters of core over about 100 holes, focused on proving up a brownfield or a resource, open pit and underground resource on one of the brownfield deposits, which we did. That's detailed on SRK's website. And we also did kind of a district-wide exploration level 43101 report in addition to that maiden resource estimate. So did that work with the intention of doing some follow-on work as well, both environmental and the exploration and metallurgical, which is now the phase that we're getting to now. Big infrastructure advantage. Again, Chile is one of the top mining jurisdictions. No matter how you're looking at it, they have most of, if not almost all of the world's largest mining companies present there. A successful national mining company that's been proven to be a partner with private companies. And it's most recently been a pretty exciting exploration jurisdiction, although a little bit higher altitude with some of the porphyry deposits, Fila del Sol and some of those. We're immediately down dip to the west from that Filo area. So we enjoy some of the same benefits. It's very accessible, an hour flight from Santiago to La Serena, and then about an hour drive to this area here where La Cobaltera is. The towns of Vallenar and Farina are nearby, not so close that they're considered local communities, that there would be no relocation or impact on them whatsoever, other than the positive potential impact of employment. And those towns are close enough that, at least as it stands for the foreseeable future, we don't need to camp on site. There's ample hotels that cater to mining companies that are in the area. You can also see a road, that yellow line cutting through kind of the spine of the district. High voltage power lines there in green. Again, I mentioned the coast here. This is the port of Huasco, which is an iron ore export terminal. CAP has an export terminal there. And there's roads and rail in here as well. So everything from local employees, everybody from unskilled labor to the chairman of the board can be filled with people from this region. Another big benefit to operating in Chile. Drilling companies, magnetic survey companies, geologists, engineers, everything you could want. So we're very happy to be operating in Chile. Senior management team, myself, I've been CEO and director for about the past year. My background for the past 7 years or so has been on the corporate side of resource business, running Chilean Cobalt. Prior to this, a Nigerian oil and gas company that started its life as a mining company in Vietnam, mining a nickel cobalt copper project there. Prior to that, I spent 10 years in investment management. Focused on metals and mining, oil and gas, and energy investments in emerging and frontier markets, and decided to jump over into the corporate side. In Chile, we have Ignacio Moreno, our country manager. He has the great distinction of having been the former mining minister, undersecretary of mining under Michelle Bachelet. And he also has excellent experience in Chile with private and public mining companies as well, including some in the area that we're operating in. So very happy to have Ignacio helping lead things in Santiago. A CFO and COO, we have Jeremy McCann, our COO. At this point, a lot of the COO's roles are compliance and things like that. Jeremy's an ace on that front and has been helping us on that front. Jim Van Horn, our CFO, very well organized, has been incredibly supportful with our listing process, and as we become a public company, he's been very helpful on that front. Felipe Quinzio in Chile, he heads up our administration. background in operations and engineering, so he understands what we're doing, not just how it needs to be done in Chile. Very helpful to have him. The board, in addition to myself and Ignacio, we have Greg Levinson, the chairman. He's the one of the founders of Chilean Cobalt and was part of the founding group as well, and was actually the interim CEO before I stepped in. Andy Sloop, independent director. He's head of our ESG committee, and is a subject matter expert on recycling, sustainability, and even mapping, with over 30 years of experience. So very helpful. Andy's job when he's not working with us at C3 is as global zero waste and circularity director at Nike. So understanding very much the raw materials business, as Nike is a raw materials user, all the way to the end products. So quite helpful in helping create our framework for ESG and execute our strategy. We have two recent additions: Geraldine Barnuevo, another independent director. She's currently the vice president of sustainability at GE Aviation, and was the former senior manager of sustainability at General Motors. And her background is also technical as well, working on environmental and social issues. She herself is from Ecuador, so from the general region. We're very excited to have Geraldine on board and helping us build out the company. Also have Fiona Clowder, another independent director. She's currently the chairman of the Anglo-Chilean Society and a senior advisor to Appian Capital, a very well-structured private equity firm in London. Fiona was also the UK ambassador to Chile for a few years, and actually overlapped with Ignacio when he was in his role in the mining ministry. And prior to that, Fiona was also the regional ambassador to Latin America and the Caribbean from the UK. So she helps us with a lot of diplomatic understanding and particularly connections into the European market, which also has a favorable priority status for Chile in terms of trade. The cobalt market, I'll touch on this very quickly. The EV battery market is driving cobalt growth right now. The alloy market has not gone away, but the growth of the EV side has more than dominated the overall demand. As you can see, benchmark, just for an example, projecting a supply deficit coming in a few years. We expect to be delivering supply into this deficit, hopefully into a more attractive pricing market that we fully expect. And as you can see, as in terms of cobalt being a factor in the cathodes, the high energy, high density battery chemistries all use cobalt. That number has been declining. This is a good chart that outlines that. Also from Benchmark Minerals, the load per average load of cobalt in a cell has declined, but the pace of demand has more than overwhelmed that. So net cobalt demand is growing, and by fairly dramatic numbers as well, X instead of percent over a 10-year basis. The deficit's expected. Significant investment needs to come into new mines to be able to satisfy this demand. Otherwise, the demand won't be able to be there. Currently, EV supply chain is dominated by China. As you can see on cobalt, most of the material comes from the Congo and is processed in China. Congo isn't necessarily the largest source for other minerals, but China is also the downstream source for most chemical form. The DRC, as I mentioned, dominates supply historically and currently. Environmental and more so social issues have brought kind of a negative view on some of that issue, that brings a question mark into some companies wanting to source material from the DRC if they can't be sure that their material was not conflict. Similarly, in Indonesia, environmental issues tend to be more of an issue there. Indonesia is a source, I believe, the second largest source, or soon to be the second largest source of cobalt, with a lot of the nickel cobalt laterite projects that are being funded. Environmental issues, and also a lot of those are also owned by Chinese companies. Maps of La Cobaltera shows where we drilled previously, as well as the vein system that we've mapped. SRK helped us do some of these maps. You can see on the next series of maps some of the surveying and mapping that we did, more on the brownfield area, and next we plan to focus on this greenfield area that we already hold. And here's a good chart, a good map showing a historical mine map that SRK helped us geolocate our blocks over, to find past producing mines that might have been covered up over the past few hundred years. Here's some site pictures, some of the underground development, outcroppings here, and the flotation plant that you can see. And that's it. I see there's some questions. One question: what are your key milestones over the next 12 months, and how will you approach your post-listing capital raise? Key milestones, I mean, that capital raise will be a milestone, 5 to 10 million. We also anticipate, ramping up our exploration campaign, planning that now. Some of it will potentially be started before the capital raise, but the capital raise itself will be in earnest, most of what we're doing with that use of funds. Also, strategic partners. We've had conversations, surprisingly advanced conversations with groups, U.S. automakers and battery manufacturers, and some European automakers that are looking to source cobalt from Inflation Reduction Act compliant countries. So expect to have one of those contracts done in the next, call it, 6 months. And that might also be a source of funding as well. So those are some of the biggest milestones that we're looking at in the near term. A question: are our shares currently trading? And if not, when do we expect? They're not trading at the moment. Last I saw on TD, the bid ask was quite wide. I think it was $1.06 bid, $4.10 sell. So a bit wide right now. We will be getting DTC eligibility and following all that process, and expect to hopefully be trading before the end of August. So stay in touch, and we can update you on that. And then can you provide some more history, past production on the La Cobaltera project? I think there's a slide back here that, and if you'd like this presentation, feel free to email me, and I'll gladly send it over. But the slide that outlines some of the past production right here, you can see this table here. That's again the cobalt side, copper side. It's produced off and on. Most recently, it was just copper, but a lot of this was more informal. Prior to the highly organized nature of Chile today. So these records are the best we have all over the property. There's not really any good pictures actually, but all over the property there's past production. Actually, I think on the final picture you can see that decently well. There's past production. A site visit is really the best way to see all that. And it's, you can see the development there. It's the desert, so there's not overgrowth or anything like that. You can see a lot of the pits, some waste rock next to it. We probably have 15 to 20 pits and underground development areas throughout the property. Also, a lot of these adits, if it's deep, you call it an adit. If it's shallow, it's more considered like a dog hole, kind of an exploration adit. And there's probably 100 or so of those throughout our properties. So significant evidence, not just of organized production, and kind of medium, small scale production, but also artisanal level before a lot of the ownership was in the format that it is now. So lots of evidence of past production, not just on our property, but across the whole district. So that's more than enough encouraging evidence for us to continue focusing on what we're doing, effectively modernizing the brownfield, what's known on the brownfield areas, continuing consolidation, and then taking a bit step out for more exploration in the district. So that's Chilean Cobalt Corp. If anybody has any questions, my email's there, duncan.blunt@chileancobaltcorp.com. More information on our website as well. Thank you.